Here's my grandfather, Mr. Jefferson Smith. And here's my grandmother, Mrs. Florine Anita Smith. The two got married and had a beautiful and large family consisting of 12 children. They all couldn't even fit in this picture. But one of those kids is my mother. There she is on the end with the white shirt and the poofy hair. Here's a more recent picture of my mother, Dr. Linda Florine Smith Fikes. My mom was number 10 of the 12 children. She was born in 1951 at a heightened time during the segregationist period in Oklahoma, Mississippi. Oklahoma is a really small town about 40 miles outside of Jackson, Mississippi. The town is so small, growing up I always thought everybody there was related. There's the dirt road that leads to her childhood home, which in fact still stands today. My aunt and cousins still live there, and my mom goes to visit every single year. Now that you've met my mom and seen where she's from and seen her childhood home, let's go back to my grandfather. That's him in the middle with the blue coveralls on. He was a farmer, a landowner, a black farmer and landowner in Mississippi in the 50s. That's a picture of all of the land that he owned. Now, he owned land in the height of the Jim Crow era, when typically black people were mostly sharecroppers. So it was a big deal for him to own his own land. Now, to understand why this was so major during that time period, let's take a brief pause and let's review some history, just to go over what times were like in the 50s for black people in Mississippi. Jim Crow ruled the daily life of blacks in the South from about 1865 to the Civil Rights era in the 50s and 60s. Although slavery was abolished, the Jim Crow laws continued to restrict the rights of black people in the South and enforced racial segregation. These were anti-black laws, and during this time, black people were treated as inferior to white people. Black people were in roles of submission and seen as less than, while white people were in roles of superiority. Black people were confined to jobs such as sharecropping. Sharecropping was a type of farming where black people rented small plots of land from white landowners. It was a way for black people to make their way back into the work economy after the Civil War. But it was also known as a new form of slavery. Blacks worked the land and were told they were going to receive seeds and food for free, and the owner would share the profits of the crops. These sharecropping agreements often didn't go as planned. The black tenant farmers often wouldn't make a profit. They were unable to provide for their families, and they often found themselves in debt to the white landowners. There were crooked accounting methods. The white landowners would cheat them out of their money. It was backbreaking and brutal labor for the sharecroppers to take care of the crops, even amidst unexpected conditions such as insect infestations, bad weather that would easily come in and destroy the crops. The sharecroppers, despite all of their work, always ended with the short end of the stick and often owed the landowners and found themselves as the laborers in poverty and in debt. Under these oppressive laws, black people were reminded of their blackness every single day of their lives, and they were also reminded of the white supremacy that existed to keep them in a place where the whites wanted them to be, which was inferior and submissive to them. There were separate facilities for whites and blacks. Whether they were swimming in a pool, going to a school, eating at a restaurant, drinking from a water fountain, the whites did not want black people doing it from or in the same space that they were. Blacks were forced to stand or sit at the back of the bus, and if they had a seat, they were forced to give it up to a white person if they needed it. It was dehumanizing. Despite the strongholds that segregationist and Jim Crow laws had on the social mobility of black people, they resisted. There were dangerous consequences to stances of opposition. Black people would get lynched, murdered. The Ku Klux Klan would burn crosses in front of their homes. But despite all of that, Black Southerners banded together in solidarity and formed a collective stance against the dehumanizing and gross injustices that Jim Crow laws subjected them to for years. This sparked a powerful moment and movement in our nation's history, the Civil Rights Movement.
In the process of working throughout the South and going to jail and getting beat and being in mass meetings and singing, there's one particular song that became the theme song of this movement. It is a powerful song. You can go anywhere in the world today where there is struggle, and you will find this song, and you will still see people in the streets marching and singing it. It is our gift to the world people in struggle. We want to ask you to stand up and cross your right hand over left and sing with us, We Shall Overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Lord, we shall overcome someday.
So that was just a brief historical backdrop of what was going on during the time when my mother was growing up and when my grandfather owned land in Mississippi. I was able to speak to my mother and her youngest sister, Joyce Smith, who still lives in the family home in Oklahoma. I asked them about what it was like growing up in Mississippi, about the family farm, and what it was like owning land and being Black farm owners during that time. They shared stories and details about their experiences and about my family history that I found absolutely fascinating. From history, I knew how difficult it was for Black people to own anything in America back in the day, including in the 50s. And so I was extremely curious about how my grandfather came to own his own land and how he got into farming in the first place. According to my mom and my Aunt Joyce, my grandfather owned land their entire lives. That's all that they knew. As a matter of fact, my mom said that they didn't even know what sharecropping was. It all started with my great-great-grandfather, Mr. Presley Groves. Presley was born and raised in Oklahoma, Mississippi, my mom's hometown. He was a white man. He was in the Mississippi House of Representatives and in the state Senate. He actually went to law school here at the University of Mississippi. He was also a Confederate soldier. The land was passed down from Presley, who passed it down to his son, Mr. M.Z. Smith. There he is standing on the left. Now, Presley Groves had biracial children during a time where interracial relationships and interracial marriages were banned. but he insisted that his children be taken care of. So he passed the land down so that they would have an inheritance. So Mr. M.Z. Smith in turn passed the land down to my grandfather, his son, Mr. Jefferson Smith. And that is how my mother's family became black landowners and farmers in Mississippi. I remember as a kid, my cousins and I would often play in the pastures and the fields out in the home in Oklahoma. I knew it was a lot of land, but I never knew how much it was exactly, so I asked my mom and my aunt. There's the picture of the land again. 200 acres. That's how much land they owned then and they own now. I'm not really good at math, so I didn't really know how big 200 acres really is. 200 acres is the equivalent to 151 football fields. 151 football fields. That is a lot of land. How did my grandfather take care of so much land? 151 football fields? Well, they had 12 children, so the children got to work. All of the kids got in the fields to take care of the farm, but my grandfather relied heavily on his 3 sons, my mom's 3 brothers, my Uncle Alvin, my Uncle Judge, and the oldest brother, my Uncle Jeff. Here's a recent picture of the 3 brothers. Taking care of that much land was a lot of work, and even with 12 children, more help was needed. So cousins were often recruited and paid to come and help take care of the farm and the crops, most specifically during their hardest crop season, which was cotton season. He also recruited other people in the neighborhood to come and help. There could never be enough help on 151 football fields worth of land. The land provided ample food from the crops that they harvested and the animals that they had on the farm, and it also provided income. They had cows, tomatoes, corn, pigs, chickens, peanuts, watermelon, greens and cabbage, and sugarcane. Sugarcane that they were able to harvest in their sugar mill and create their own sorghum syrup. The main staple on the farm was cotton. Now, a typical harvest of cotton would yield them many bales of cotton, which my grandfather would take to the nearest town, Carthage, and sell for profit. The money received for the cotton allowed my grandfather to provide clothes and other necessities for the family. Now, the difference of them being sharecroppers and landowners is they were able to keep their money. If they were sharecroppers, the landowners would take the money and only give them a small portion of it. They also had mules, which they used to till and cultivate the land. They were not financially or materialistically rich by any means, but my mother's family, through hard work, a lot of love, and strong family values, were able to establish and maintain independence in the face of severe racism, oppression, and segregation. My mother said that her family was extremely close and love and respect were heavily stressed. Despite being poor and growing up poor, they were rich in so many other things and values that stayed with them their entire lives. She remembers having feelings of sadness because they knew and were well aware of the limitations that were placed on Black people. She remembers watching her mother bow her head and say yes, sir, and no, sir, in a very subservient way to white people who were younger than her. She remembers walking and entering into white-owned restaurants through the back door because they weren't welcome through the front door. She remembers drinking from different water fountains that said colored only and sitting in different waiting rooms. She didn't grow up playing with white people or going to school with white people. That didn't happen until 1972 when she moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By that time, she was in college. Not only was this the first time that she found herself in a classroom and being around white people, but it was the first time that she had teachers that were white. This was a very scary time for her. It was traumatic, she said. It was beyond culture shock. She didn't know how to behave. She remained a loner for years. Now, back in Mississippi, all schools were finally desegregated around January 1970. And my aunt, who still lived in Mississippi, experienced something quite different. Even though blacks and whites were all under one school building, they were in fact still segregated because all of the black children stuck together and all of the white children stuck together. They rarely, if at all, interacted with each other. Despite the racism and extremely difficult conditions around them, my mom was raised in a family that made them feel like everything was still okay. They felt protected, she said. Her mom and dad modeled hard-working and loving people. Their parents provided them a feeling of hope despite what was going on around them. She grew up feeling, and her siblings grew up feeling, that they could grow up and do whatever they wanted to do in their lives. And they truly believed that in their hearts. Because of the strength and determination that she saw from her parents, somewhere deep down in my mom's heart, she knew that even though things were difficult right now for black people, it wouldn't always be this way. The struggles they faced and endured and overcame as black people in Mississippi did not stop my mother or her siblings from going after their dreams. When she was 14 years old and made the decision to become a doctor, she was supported. She said that her father and her mother fueled her dreams, and their encouragement carried her to accomplish those dreams. My mom took what she called that fuel from her parents and went on and completed medical school. In 1982, she graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Medical School. The entire family, as a matter of fact, went on to do some pretty amazing things. Here are some of the incredible careers her siblings went on to have. Registered nurse, FBI agent, medical assistant, Army vet, restaurant owner, school teacher, fish market owner, entrepreneur. They all also went on to have some beautiful families that live all across the United States. Regardless of how far wide they're spread, Oklahoma, Mississippi is always home, and they always return back to their home, their land. My mom's mother, Miss Florine, taught my mom and instilled in her kindness, how to be open, unselfish, and a genuinely loving person. She showed her what it means to genuinely care for others. And these are values and traits that my mother has passed down to her children, me and my 3 sisters. So what does all of this mean for me, and what has this taught me? Well, first, this taught me that as a people and as a family, we rise. Through this process, I learned all of the hardships that my family endured and overcame. It brought the stories that I've read about in history books and seen in movies, it brought them to real life. And it taught me about how strong and resilient my family is. The seeds of love, caring, empathy, and compassion were sown years ago with my grandparents, and they were carried down from my mother to me. And these are tools that I'll utilize heavily and rely on as I work with clients in my career in counseling. My research on this project magnified just the tip of the iceberg of why social justice and social advocacy are critical components to counseling. It ignited my desire to increase my involvement in advocating for change and fighting for social justice for my clients and the communities they come from. I will continue to break down barriers and resist against systems of oppression and structural racism that still get in the way of access to education, jobs, healthcare, income, and other resources afforded to others. I'm motivated to bring all of the traits that were passed down to me, the caring, the empathy, the compassion, the authenticity, to work to reduce the inequities in the society that disrupts and interferes in my future clients' lives. I come from a legacy of resiliency. I come from a legacy and heritage of strength and courage. I know what is possible.